Given this past week's coverage on the podcast and newsletter, it may not surprise you to learn that outside of China, Israel is the country I spent the most time in and is the only place outside the US where I have blood relatives. I wanted to present a guest episode of my favorite podcast about Israel that was recorded yesterday. Three journalists on the center left of politics in the country present the horror of the past weekend, as well as share some of the beauty and spirit displayed by the Israeli people during and in the aftermath of the events that deserve to be acknowledged and remembered. There's no direct connection to China in the content here, but the stories and emotion in this show help give context to the despair felt by those invested in the Israel China relationship by China's reaction to the attacks. I hope you find this episode as meaningful as I did. Thank you.
Welcome to the Promise Podcast, brought to you on TLV1, the voice of the city that has, over the past couple of days, been a place of a strange, quiet, almost unknown in its history, and at the same time, the site of frenzied activity of a very particular sort, also almost unknown in its history. All this, of course, as people here absorb and absorb Saturday's unabsorbable tragedies. On Sunday, the streets of Tel Aviv were strangely quiet. No one told the shop owners not to open their shops or the sidewalk cafe managers not to bother to put the tables and chairs out for the day. But everyone just knew as who would shop anyway and who would stop for cappuccino in the sun anyway. And besides, the schools were closed and everyone was staying close to home because the sirens that announced the missile attacks were sure to go off as they did. And so it happened that the streets and sidewalks and beaches and boardwalk were mostly empty and the air was clear. And listening to the news, as so many of us did all day long, you could set the volume down 3 or 4 hash marks lower than you normally did because there were no trucks and cars rolling by to drown out the sound or carousing packs of kids killing the day in the city, all of which together gave the city a solemnity that it almost never has, save for maybe for a few hours on the evening of Memorial Day for the fallen soldiers and terror victims. And at the same time, even as we blanketed ourselves in silence, many spots in the city became sites of manic activity, inside and out, back and on the sidewalk in front of Ha'achim restaurant at the south end of Ibn Gavriel Street. Big tables were set up to make thousands of meals for soldiers, assembly line style haute cuisine. One table just for salads, another for vegetable sides, still another for main dishes. And when the first thousands of meals were turned down by the army because the restaurant doesn't have a hechsher, a kosher certification, the owners got the president of the country to arrange for them to cut through the bureaucracy and get a record speed hechsher so that they could keep their volunteer staff at work packing 20,000 now certified kosher meals a day. Meanwhile, in Hangar 11, the huge convention and concert space in the port right near where I live, there has risen, not even overnight. It happened ex nihilo, spontaneous generation, just hours after the first reports of the attack, a clearinghouse for donated stuff that just keeps coming and coming in trucks and cars and motorcycles and on bikes and lugged in by people who come on foot holding overflowing cardboard boxes. And there are places to bring your canned good and places to bring your dried packed foods. There is a section for rice and couscous. And don't get me started about bamba. Of course, there is an area for diapers, bottles, formula, and there's a drugs and pharma team, and there's a bottled water team. And if you stick your head into the building, the din of the thing is so loud. People taking stuff out of boxes and putting stuff into boxes, forklifts moving pallets. It is a Bruegel painting. And yesterday in Dizengoff Square, the spot of those awful fights on Yom Kippur just a couple of weeks ago, there was yesterday a makeshift collection spot, and the fake grass of Dizengoff Square filled with crowds of people and piles of stuff. And all over the city, there are pop-up collection spots and hundreds of people gather around saying, how can I help? What can I do? And arguably nothing captures the spirit of this city we love so well, Tel Aviv Yafo, better than responding to the extreme and awful things that happened on Saturday by becoming an extreme and wondrous version of itself, an extreme version of the somber moral gravity that is always just beneath the surface of this place, which is why no one needs to tell anyone to stop their day to day in the face of the tragedy suffered by other people and by all of us, and becoming at the same time an extreme version of the frenetic energy that is never normally beneath the surface and is now turned entirely toward helping other people and all of us. With us in the studio to talk about all that has gone on are Alison Kaplan-Summer of Haaretz and Miriam Herschlag of the Times of Israel, two women who, like this city, bring together in their works and their lives gravity and energy and a physics that makes them the people that I want and need to turn to at a time like this. And maybe you do too. Hey, it is really good to see both of you. How are you holding up?
What a question, right?
Yeah.
I kind of feel like, I don't know, over the last 4 days, has it been 4 days?
I think months maybe.
Who's counting? No, really. So, it's really hard to make analogies that people who are not here will understand. But my friends, I've been saying if they can mentally rewind to either immediately after 9/11 or in the height of the initial COVID outbreak, just where the surreal seems normal and days just seem like months and weeks. So everything's stretched out. And my particular journalism brain kind of feels like I've been sucking information in like a vacuum cleaner and then spitting it back out because I've been all those things that Noah lists at the beginning of the podcast. She's been on the BBC and the Al Jazeera and this and that and that. I've been on all of them in the past 4 days, like 4 and 5 days a week. So I'm like taking things in as a journalist and then not putting them not only out in writing and stuff, but going on the show. So yeah, I feel a little mentally weary, and I'd like to apologize in advance if I make any inappropriate black humor because that's how I've been coping with everything. Like we are now in our underground studio, and there are rockets going off, and I kind of feel like we're Hamas leaders because I feel very safe in
In
our
the
underground
bunker.
bunker. Yeah.
I'm okay. It's nice to be here. This is the furthest I've gone from my house. It's about 2 miles away from my house, a little over 3 kilometers. A couple of
And you
hours.
locked your bicycle in the
I
spot where I
blocked your
normally
space.
lock my
I'm
bicycle.
sorry. I thought he didn't get here before me.
She took
He
your
should have got here
spot.
before me. And actually 2 hours ago or 3 hours ago was the furthest I'd gone until I came here, which was just to the supermarket, which is half a mile from my house. So I've been glued, and I do want to say we're going to talk about our experiences, but I want to acknowledge that so many of the people listening to us are grieving, and I do think we're less in an us-you thing. That's part of what I'm sure we'll talk about with people who are outside of this country. We have listeners inside this country, some of whom live in the south of the country. So it's a chance for us to say how much we love you and how much we grieve for your grief, and how much we know that there are people listening outside of this country who are connected to this in some very, very direct, personal, and visceral ways, as well as just people who love this place and are worried and losing sleep and sending their love, which is very appreciated. I notice I'm kind of become a bit of a whore for those messages. They get me.
Well,
They get me.
it's really
I
it's really
appreciate them.
moving, and it's really, I mean, they're it turns out that if you live, for as long as we've lived, then you've met and you've connected with a lot of people, and then
Mhm.
there are a lot of people who are thinking of you, and you're of course thinking of a lot of people yourself, and
Yeah.
so hundreds and hundreds of people making contact. It's really, really moving. Each one of them is
Yeah.
moving. It's like I'm amazed that
Yeah.
they had the energy to have, use up any neurons remembering that I exist, and so many people did. So I am Noah Ephron, by the way. And I'll start with this. At 7:16 in the evening on Saturday, while people were still being killed, huddled in their fortified rooms by gangs going methodical door to door in kibbutzim and moshavim, where amazingly, 14 hours after the border fence that divides Israel from Gaza was busted open, the IDF had still not arrived. At that moment, at 7:16 in the evening, Ori Matuki, a leader of the Socialist Renewal Movement, Dror Yisrael, and an activist and a member of the Forum for Social Justice, watching everything unfold on his phone like so many of the rest of us, tweeted, quote, "These descriptions of the city of slaughter, of people hiding in their homes as the butcher's butcher, they terrify me. There is nothing scarier than this," end quote. Writing in Yediot the next day, Yuval Noah Harari said, quote, "At first, the comparisons were to the Yom Kippur War. Then the imagery went back to older, more frightening places, to the settlements attacked in the War of Independence, to Negba and Yad Mordechai. In the end, we went back to the heart of darkness, ground zero of Zionism, to Kishinev, to the city of slaughter," end quote. In a statement that day, the prime minister also said that what happened, it was the city of slaughter. And what Matuki and Harari and Netanyahu were all referring to, and there are lots of other people who made this reference over the past few days, is Chaim Nachman Bialik's poem, Be'ir HaHariga, in the city of slaughter, which was first printed in a paper called Hazman 120 years ago next month. And the subject of the poem is the pogrom or massacre in Kishinev in Russia, today Moldova, on Easter and for 2 days after in 1903, when a riled mob, all too eager to believe that Jews had murdered a Christian boy and a Christian girl, raged through the Jewish part of town and killed 49 and raped dozens and otherwise injured hundreds and wrecked more than 1,000 homes. And Bialik, just turned 30, was sent by some Jewish organization to investigate the Kishinev pogrom. And he described what he found in that poem that he eventually called Ba'ir HaHariga, in the city of slaughter, which everyone still learns in schools here now 120 years later, and part of which my girl can still declaim by heart a dozen years after she memorized it for class. And the poem starts like this.
קום לך לך אל עיר ההרגה, ובאת אל החצרות. ובעיניך תראה, ובידך תמשש על הגדרות, ועל העצים, ועל האבנים, ועל גבי טיח הכתלים, את הדם הקרוש, ואת המוח הנקשה של החללים.
Get up and go to the city of slaughter. You'll arrive at its courtyards, and you will see with your own eyes and touch with your own hands, on the fence, on the trees, on the stone, on the plaster of the walls, the coagulated blood and the dried brains of the victims, and you will pass the broken pocked walls and the smashed fireplaces, whose burned bricks and charred stones reveal the open mouths of black human wounds that can never be mended and for which there is no medicine. And it goes on like that, describing children and men whose heads were hacked off and girls and women raped while their fathers and husbands watched from hiding, wondering if, so violated, these women could thereafter ever again be wives. A horrid picture in the poem was an angry screed not only against the Cossacks, but also against the passive, weak, pathetic Jews who did nothing but hide in their rooms, allowing tragedy to be visited on them. And it was maybe the most powerful call that has ever been called to, well, Zionism, I guess, to becoming a people with a land and an army. And the poem really made a difference that lasted, as the great Tel Aviv writer and critic Natan Goren wrote just a little while after Israel was established in 1948, that, quote, "Everything that sprouted up then in our lives, from the self-defense units to the new Hebrew culture, to the rise of revolutionary circles among the younger generation of Jews, to the very summit of the Jewish revolution, namely the Second Aliyah, all these grew from the seed that Bialik planted in the city of slaughter," end quote. And Bialik's poem made a lot of people mad, and it still does, the way he described the victims of the pogrom. It was so harsh.
Absolutely.
And so unfeeling, and making them emblems of all that was weak and sad and pathetic and unlovable about Jews and Judaism in lands where Jews and Judaism were unloved and unwanted, making those poor victims into the old Jews that the new Jews that Zionism would create would surely surpass in dignity and power and humanity. So it says something that this week, this poem suddenly came alive again for so many people. And you can see how it did. The mob of angry people killing and raping and hacking apart babies, and the dragging of women through the streets by their hair, and the Jews making themselves as small and as quiet as possible, hiding out in little rooms, hoping the brutes with the guns would pass their door by. It was shocking how quickly all those images came rushing back, this elemental thing, this atavistic thing. But these things always work in both directions, and the terrible echoes of those terrible times in the past, the really scary similarities between what happened in the farming settlements and towns around Gaza and what happened 120 years ago in Kishinev, also serves to point out the great differences between there and then and here and now. Here and now, when El Al planes are stuffing extra passengers even into their cockpits because airports around the world are choked with IDF soldiers fighting to get on planes so they can join their friends in their units to go fight in Gaza. And people here are driving around up and down on highways and streets in hopes of finding someone, anyone who needs a ride to get to a place that they need to go to. And restaurants are delivering free food, and hotels are giving free rooms, and laundries are doing free loads, and trucks are carrying for free diapers and toothpaste and shampoo. And everyone, everywhere is saying and writing and thinking tributes to the 1,000-odd people who were killed, describing them as they were strong and joyous and splendid and so deeply, deeply loved. The day after he first tweeted about the city of slaughter, Ori Matuki, after hearing the prime minister refer to the same poem, tweeted again that, quote, "When the prime minister quotes Bialik's In the City of Slaughter, he sends us back 120 years to when we had no state, no army, when we could be anyone's prey." And I am, a historian, and 120 years is nothing. And the world was cruel 120 years ago, and it is cruel now. And big things seldom change fast. And the people Bialik described, they deserved better at his hand back then. But still, we are different than we were back then. And we have built a place in which we can be different than we were back then. And it is a beautiful place, though immeasurably less so today than it was when the sun came up on Saturday. Today, we are going to have just the one discussion really on the subject of what did we just go through? What are we going through? What do we worry, maybe hope that we will be going through tomorrow and next week and after that? And that will be our one discussion. For our excessively generous Patreon supporters in our extra special extra segment, given that Miriam and Allison are both top flight journalists who have been, I can tell you by their exhausted faces, working and working and working, we will talk about journalism and journalists through this thing, from how the war was presented to us through our screens to how in the buildings where the thing happens, the people organized themselves to be able to present to us as they did what was going on through our screens. That's for our Patreon people. But before we get to any of that, listen to this.
אל תלכי, קרן שמש, לא נגמר לנו היום. למה את מסתתרת, עננים בכל מקום. אל תבכי, כמו הגשם, לא חבל על הדמעות. יד חמה מבקשת לחבק אותך שעות. אשים שירים שאת אוהבת, אתן לך יום להירגע. אני נגנב כשאת צוחקת ככה אליי. תגידי מה את מבקשת, שלא יהיה לי שום תירוץ. כשאין מילים את מתרגשת ככה אליי. תחייכי, זה יפה לך, זה עושה לי את היום. אם פתאום את נרדמת, תחייכי גם בחלום. מטוסים.
That song is Karen Shemesh by Benaya Barabi. Okay, we're going to do this thing. This past Saturday, October 7th, 50 years and one day after the Egyptians and Syrian armies surprised the IDF with invasions from the south and the north of the country, launching the Yom Kippur War that took 2,521 Israeli lives and left 7,250 Israelis injured, though many more with psychic wounds that would become apparent over the decades that followed. The grim dead and wounded counts on the other side were never announced. Maybe they were never even tabulated. Israelis suffered exactly 50 years and one day after that what Deborah Lipstadt, the U.S. Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, called in a tweet the most lethal attack against Jews since the Holocaust. By now, I guess I don't need to say much about what happened, because if this matters to you, you probably already know. But briefly, early in the morning, as a barrage of rockets were fired onto cities, towns, and farming settlements up the coast all the way to Tel Aviv and a little beyond, 1,000 or so Palestinians, though Miriam just told me as we were listening to the song that maybe it was as many as 3,000. We don't know. Palestinian what? Hamas combatants, fighters, young men, thugs, Cossacks, murderers, butchers, all of those things burst forth from Gaza, busting through the border barrier in dozens of places on foot, in jeeps, on motorcycles, going through secret terror tunnels and sailing in dinghies up coast and rendezvousing in groups of 20 to 50 outside each of 20 Jewish towns and settlements and 8 army bases, and went to work, moving from building to building, in most cases, murdering the people that they found. One cadre of Gazans made their way to the Universo Paralelo Supernova Sukkot Gathering Festival, the quote-unquote Brazilian and South Central American Psy-Trans Festival, considered the biggest and most esteemed international alternative electronica festival in Latin America, with such acts as Jack Lang, Aladdin, No Face, Jump Street, Artifacts, and Swore Up, who was in the event performing when the Hamas men came and began strafing the festival with automatic rifles and anti-tank rockets, grenades, and more, murdering 260 festival goers, raping and executing dozens of them, and loading maybe dozens onto jeeps destined for Gaza, where they would serve as hostages. A somewhat similar pattern repeated itself mutatis mutandis in the farming settlements, the kibbutzim and moshavim, where groups of gunmen went house to house, most often killing the occupants, though sometimes loading them onto vehicles and taking them back to Gaza. In Kfar Aza, 40 murdered babies were found, apparently some of them beheaded. All this murder, rape, and kidnap went on for long hours, 12, 15, 18, before IDF soldiers showed up. And by the time they did, more than 1,000 Israelis were dead. The numbers are still being counted up. Almost 3,000 were wounded, and maybe 150 are being held hostage in Gaza, though how many of those people have already been killed as prisoners, we have at the moment very little idea. Those are the bare facts, though. Each of the 4,000 odd people killed, wounded, and kidnapped is a story unto herself and himself, of course. And much of the time since Saturday, many of us have spent learning a bit, just a little bit of these stories, which has been torturesome. And right now, as we record 4 days after all this happened, we don't know much more than we do know. And we're not pundits and we're not security experts or authorities in international relations. What we are is people who live here. Some of us have been through the army, and all of our kids have been through the army or will be. And we are people who know and love people who were killed, and who know and love people who know and love people who were killed. And we work with folks whose kids were killed and drink espresso at cafes whose owners' parents were killed. So we are experts in what these past 4 days have been like for us. Of course, it is true that Allison and Miriam are also, like I said, top flight journalists. So they're experts in things that I'm not experts in. But what it has been like for us is what it is that we're going to talk about today. So Miriam, let's start with you. What was the day like, first of all, Saturday itself? How did you discover this and what happened after that?
I was woken up by the siren, which I had been saying was at 6:30, and I just looked at my phone and see that at 6:41 I received 2 missed calls that are from emergency numbers, and I had no idea that had actually been put into gear. But the sirens, and were plural, and they were waving up and down, and there was this tremendous
Plural meaning coming from 2 neighborhoods?
Yeah, multiple, probably 3. We're in the southeast of Tel Aviv, so we'd be hearing Ramat Gan. We might actually hear Holon or Bat Yam as well, and certainly other parts of the city. So, we are divided into areas. I think Tel Aviv is divided into something like 5 different areas, and then we're near Ramat Gan, we're near Givatayim. So it was this, waking from a dream after very little sleep, actually, with just this wail of the siren. You say wail of the siren, it sounds like crying. And I also was so bleary that I actually thought, wait, is that a drill? Which is very funny because there's no drills on Saturdays. You're like,
On
I like
Simchat Torah on holiday
yes,
Saturday.
exactly. I was really tired, and it took me, I think, probably half a minute to wake up Jonathan, my guy, and say, siren, siren. And anyway, after that, I was, looking for information, and there was this ominous. I'm sure we all experienced this. I'll hear, but no information. And Galit Sahal at 7 o'clock had like this young girl. And if you work in news, you kind of know, like, oh, yeah, they put her on the holiday one. It's like this girl that sounds like a 12-year-old saying, uh, yes, there were sirens and very little, no information. And waiting and waiting and waiting until the news came on. And I think may have been even almost 9 o'clock when that happened. So it was a couple of hours. And we're kind of following it. We've been through this. This is all somewhat familiar. And then the images started coming in. And these were videos from private phones uploaded. And not too long after that, they were actually Hamas videos that we were seeing. So when I saw a truckload.
Were you seeing these just on Twitter?
No, they were the home videos were coming through not home videos, the people's phones that they were uploading to social media, and Channel 12, which is what I was watching, it was showing them and talking through them. And when I saw a truckload, or what we call a tender, a pickup truck full of Hamas terrorists in black, armed, in the city of Sderot, I broke down. This was not something we've ever seen before. So I realized that at least one entire town was infiltrated with many dozens of terrorists walking around with serious weapons and shooting. And that's when I understood this was something of a different. Obviously, I didn't know the dimensions, but that there was something else happening. And I just went, those poor people, and broke down for a while. And then the next thing you do when you're just sitting there on your hands is, what can I do? And so you switch into work mode. And I'm an opinion editor. I mean, you talk to me, I wouldn't call myself a top flight journalist. I run an opinion platform, and opinions don't happen very quickly. And we don't actually want opinions at that time. We want information. But very soon I realized that one of our bloggers, Adele Raymer, who is someone with like half a degree of separation, not a friend, but friend of friends, relative of friends, young Judea from our youth movement, was in a locked room in Kibbutz Nirim, and she's a blogger par excellence, and very much her mission is to try and explain to people what it is like to live just a spitting distance from, or rocket distance from, Gaza, to be someone who's trying to reach out all the time to Gazans, and has sort of peace activities. And she's very interesting. She's become a spokesperson, in all kinds of ways for that community. And she was in her room writing one-line sentences about what was happening, and she was with her son. And so I decided to just take anything she wrote as she wrote it, something I've never done, and keep just updating that one post. And so I was sort of with her and waiting for every. And so there was what we uploaded, or what I published at that time was, I hear massive shooting. I have never been this scared in my life. And I left it very raw, so it feels like what you see. And she's great. She puts pictures up. And it was important, I think, for me to understand what was going on. Obviously, you call your kids, you call my sister up north, very quick, just to check in and make sure everything's okay. Waiting for some official voice, which is, you just expect this. You expect anybody, Dover Tzahal, the prime minister, um, the defense minister, and that was something we can talk about another time, where that there was a huge hole. As a citizen, not as a reporter, as a citizen, as a private individual in a place of fear, being able to see people in charge, taking charge, is part of what we want. And it
didn't happen.
No, it was just gone.
It
And
still
then
hasn't really
the
happened.
little bit that it happened, which was our defense minister coming on for a 50-second thing, wearing a black. He looked a little ridiculous, like he was trying to look tough and grim, and then gave no information at all, and said bayush. Like it was like he was.
And then Netanyahu saying we're at war, also one sentence.
That
and
was
we will
really late in the day, though. Wasn't
Very
that even
late.
in the evening? There were just
I think it was in
hours
the
and
afternoon.
hours and hours of pundits on television talking and saying, where is some sort of official spokesman for official anything?
And
And
where
there
is
was
the
nothing.
fucking army? But so Allison, how did your day go?
Well, I was woken up by my husband's app on his phone, because we all have these red alert apps, and his goes off if there's something close to us in our area. And so 6:40 something.
41 apparently.
Yeah, 6:41 apparently. So it went off, and it seemed like such a weird fluke, because the routine that we're used to is rockets start hitting the south, and there's a few rockets, and then there's more, and then look, they're going as far as Yavne after Ashdod and Ashkelon. They're going all the way up to Rehovot. Rishon, Tel Aviv. So by the time they get up, to we are in Renana, we're sort of expecting it. So to have out of the blue to hear that was, there has to have been a mistake. Something misfired. Something
Right.
went wrong. Some sort of technical
False
error.
alarm.
False alarm. So sort of like I listened to his phone go off, and I get turn it off, and went back to rest. And then what?
No.
10 minutes
Don't do
later,
that.
10 minutes later, boom, a real siren goes off. So I got up, and Tamar came out of her room, and we all went down to the shelter. But it still felt odd, like this isn't supposed to happen this way. It's not just supposed to come out of the blue in freaking Renana. So again, there was still this feeling of disbelief. And like Miriam said, there was a dearth of information in the beginning, but I'm on a lot of social networks, groups, WhatsApp groups, and some of them have people from the South. So at a very early stage, someone on one of my WhatsApp groups in Sderot, who lives in Sderot, said they're shooting underneath my building. And I was like, what?
Did you think at that moment that it couldn't possibly be true? I mean, did you?
Yeah.
It just seems like an impossible statement.
Shooting under a friend's building
In
in
Sderot.
Sderot. Like Sderot, okay, rockets, you expect it, but that, absolutely not. And then on another WhatsApp group, a friend who lived on a southern kibbutz said, we're in our safe room, locked, and they're banging on the door. And I was like, who's banging on the door? The kibbutz security people are banging on the door? Why would people be banging on your door? It completely did not mentally register that there could be infiltrators inside her kibbutz banging on her door. And
What kibbutz was that?
Holit. And so, again, like it just our mind just goes to the familiar. I'm thinking about the rockets, and I'm thinking about, not even coming close to the scale of what's going on. So of course I start, with my black humor and joking about how I was so bummed that I'd gotten tickets for the second Bruno Mars concert and not the first Bruno Mars concert, because man, I really wanted to go to the Bruno Mars concert, and now it looked like it would be off. And again, in the beginning, we're like, will they call the concert off? Is this really a thing? Because we all just thought it was rockets. Or if, whatever, that if there had been maybe a few infiltrators, it was not on a large scale. So, including my friend who had said there were people knocking on her door. I'm still texting with her, and she's like, oh, my daughters really wanted to go to Bruno Mars tonight too. It's such a bummer. And I sent her a meme that was going around with Bruno Mars singing, I'll catch a grenade for you. And everyone's saying, really? Will you? At that point, we're still really joking, and we did not get how serious it was.
I'm sorry to cut to the end of this. Is that particular friend and her daughter, are they fine?
No. My friend is not fine. I'll talk about it later in the podcast. But that's just how, I don't want to say normal it started, because none of this is normal, but sort of the same old bad stuff it felt like. So it really took time. And again, so seeing on Channel 12 the picture of the guys in the pickup truck with the Kalashnikovs going down the center of an Israeli city, looking like a freaking scene from Fauda, you're thinking that's not real. Like fake news.
That is impossible.
That's impossible. It was not fathomable. And as Noah has pointed out, my saying in our discussion of the Yom Kippur War in the past podcast, oh, we can never be surprised by anything. Ha, and immediately start thinking, what a great way to commemorate Yom Kippur War by realizing that we're still as clueless as we were back then. I think our friend Benji Lovett made a black humoristic joke like that, like what a way to commemorate it by being as taken off guard as we were back then. So yeah, and I volunteered, into Haaretz, even though I couldn't imagine what I could do and what can I do to help. And they just said, we're throwing things up as fast as we possibly can. Can you just go over everything we put up and proofread it for typos and, mistakes and spelling mistakes, whatever. Just try to clean up the copy because they were, on their skeleton of skeletons cruise, on Shabbat, holiday, whatever. And they all of a sudden had to call people in. And by the time they could get people in.
But that way, every single headline is being filtered through you on that day. Like you're literally.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to do on a proofreading basis. So I just felt social media platforms and WhatsApp groups were as or more valuable that day to understand what was going on in the South. Friends in Ashkelon, Ashdod, who were posting what it was like and what they were going through. Where I was able to read those before the TV stations were able to actually get their microphones in front of people's faces and say, what was it like? What was it like? But the lack of authoritative voices on television was just shocking.
We'll
It
talk
was
about this also,
very
except for the
surprising.
newscasters who were amazing.
Yeah.
So my day also started out, I guess, like yours, of being awakened by a siren. And when the sirens go off, the dog is like really terrified. She becomes very sweet and sort of surprisingly uncharacteristically compliant, but she just shakes and shakes and shakes. And so you gather her up and take her out to the hallway, and she likes the hallway because the neighbors are there, though over the course of the day, all the neighbors left. But at the beginning, they were there, and there was another dog there as well. So she was happy about that, though she was just shaking and shaking and shaking. And I went back in, and like you, Allison, I just assumed it was just kind of the normal thing. And I kind of got ready to go to our Chavurah because it's Simchat Torah.
Right.
And
Got
for
the
me, there
cancellation.
were two moments where things switched in a really obvious way for me, and it's clear that I'm much less connected than you are. And also, Susan was in the United States at the time, and I was alone in the house. The girl is off in England studying, and the boy is off in California studying.
And you were off electronics, presumably.
And I was off electronics. So I asked in the hallway, I asked the neighbors, what is it? And they said, who knows? And so I went back in, and I just got ready to go to shul and took a shower and all that. And then I noticed on my phone lit up because I got a WhatsApp that I'm sure you got too, Miriam, from Audrey, who was in charge of our Chavurah, saying that the Chavurah was canceled. We weren't going to be, and that alerted me to first the fact that Audrey was using the telephone on Shabbat and on the holiday made me realize that something really big was happening, and it was like this terrifying moment. And at the same time, I saw that there was a message from the Camry Theater where I was supposed to see Utzli Gutzli that afternoon, the Rumpelstiltskin, and I was looking forward to it. And it said, due to events, this is canceled. And I was surprised by that. So then I said, okay, I guess I'm using the phone now. And I started looking at the phone. But for me, I found really not very much at all for a number of hours. Now, I don't know, till 9, 10, 11, there wasn't very much at all.
From 11 on, it became real. And that's when they were getting the videos. Also from the Misibat Teva, from this concert.
And so the second thing the second moment that things changed for me was soon after that, when I got a call from the boy in California, and I figured, oh, I guess I'm just using the phone now on Shabbat, and I answered it because I assumed he was worried about me in some way, though exactly what he was worried about I didn't know, but I thought maybe a rocket landed nearby, and he knows that somehow it's the middle of the night in California, and he said, he knew a lot more than me, and he said these things are happening. The news is saying that 20 people were killed, which seemed like an enormous, incomprehensible number. 22 people, to be precise, had been killed, and so he was coming back to the country. He was leaving school in the middle. It's like just past midterms, and he had already made reservations on an airplane, and he was going to come back. And I was
so early.
Yeah, and I
in
was
the process.
Yes, and I was kind of at first I was saying, I was saying, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm sure I want to do this." And then he called back again, maybe 2 hours later, because his plane was canceled and he needed to make a reservation on El Al because his United flights was canceled and all the United flights were going to be canceled, and so now he needed to make another thing. And by then, there was a lot more news, and they were still saying that 22 people are dead, but they thought the numbers were going to rise significantly. So I was thinking maybe 40 people are dead, maybe 50 people are dead. And he said he got a message that the army wants him to come back. And it was actually not an official message from the army, but it was from his commander saying, "We're all gathering. You should." And he had decided that he was going to come back. And at that point, and this is the second switch that I made, I don't come off so great in this story. Like this kind of like really fundamental selfishness comes through, and there's no way to mask this, because for me the big switch was this second call with him, and he's saying, "I'm coming," and I'm helping him. "Do you have use our credit card? Of course we'll pay. You're coming back to defend Ima and me, so it's on us." And he and I find myself being really, really careful when I'm talking to him to sound positive, even though in my mind I think this is a terrible idea. I don't know if I think it's a terrible idea. I just wish that he hadn't thought of it. I wish that nobody had thought of it. I wish that he just said, "I'm in school in California. That's where I am," and it hadn't frankly crossed my mind that he was going to come back. So until he called, and of course then I didn't know that this was so big. But it wouldn't have crossed my mind. I would have thought, "Oh, thank God he's in California." And I find myself thinking that I have to make sure to be really positive and supportive, like or neutral entirely, because, and this is the image in my mind, like I think, okay, a week from now or 2 weeks from now, he's in some alley in Gaza, and being shot at, and thinking, did I disappoint my father by coming here? So that was the moment that I totally flipped out, and from there, I hooked up immediately. So he got off the phone, and he was in touch with Susan, and she actually bought the ticket with him on El Al, and he came the next day. He arrived on Monday, and I met him at the airport. But then right after that, everything is different for me. And I see that Nir Guntaj, who is this journalist, I guess he's a journalist in Haaretz. He has this very important column that is not exactly journalism, though he also does journalism. The column that's not journalism is he calls people and he records every word that they say. He sort of shocks them.
In Haaretz, Nir Guntaj.
And he basically will ambush people who he thinks have done something wrong and make them explain it. And he records every word and he prints it, which is both dickish and wonderful and important at the same time. And he starts tweeting about how his son is in some room somewhere, and he's lost. And at the beginning he hasn't lost contact. His son calls him and is in some room. Won't someone help him? And then he's tweeting, the army's not there. No one's helping him. Will somebody give me a gun? I want to go down there myself and rescue him. And over the course of the day, he's just tweeting about his son. And I was off with that. I mean, in the end, that particular story has this crazy end where this Yair Golan, ex-minister Yair Golan, who doesn't know Nir Guntaj at all, says, "I will take this on," and he goes in his car and he picks up Nir Guntaj's son, and he takes him out of this village that is this kibbutz that is overrun by this murderous mob. just because he has also seen the tweets. But anyway, then I was off, and I haven't come back yet.
The parallel story, and I think a lot of people have seen it on the media, is my colleague Amir T-Bone, who I was worrying about all day. He lives on Nahal Oz with his wife and small daughters, and I've been to his house, and I've spent time there. And tiny girls, I mean, 1.5 and 3 years old, and they lay there for 12 hours? Hours and hours and hours. Nobody came to help them. And his 62-year-old father, a retired general who's been very prominent in the protest movement, just eventually got in his car and rounded up soldiers as he went and at the entrance to the kibbutz, and just basically did a Rambo type mission, and took over the mission of saving the people in the kibbutz. And they killed some of the terrorists, and then he finally got to the shelter where his son and his granddaughters were, and the little girls were like, "Saba's here, Grandpa's here."
The way that I read it is
Yeah.
they said, we knew that Saba would come to
Right.
save us.
Yeah. And Amir's really touching observation was, just as I was asking my daughters to have faith in us and telling them they needed to be really, really, really quiet all day, and they hadn't had any food all day, and they did everything they were told just because they had pure faith in their parents. He said he knew that he had to have pure faith in his father the same way, that he would come and that he would save them. It sounds unfair saying this almost, because I'm sure maybe there were other parents and grandparents who wanted to come or who tried to come, and just that they didn't necessarily have the happy endings that Amir's family did. But being a friend of Amir, I'm very glad that it turned out that way.
So the next question I have is, what, if anything, changed for you? Like, did you learn anything in this? Were there conceptions that you had that were somehow overturned? I mean, we all said that. I think, or at least Allison and I said that we couldn't possibly have even imagined something like this happen. Like it seemed like this was a problem that was solved back, if not in 1973, then in 1974 and 5, and ever since, that we would never be surprised that, like Israeli intelligence, this was impossible, and it happened. So that was one thing. But is there anything else that came of this day?
It was just a failure on so many levels. I mean, first of all, conceiving that Hamas would do something like this, because it was, in fact, a suicide mission, because you look at how we're retaliating now, and it was just writing should be on the wall that we would basically flatten Gaza. I mean, whoever decided to do this, I don't know if it went through their head what they were basically sentencing the population in Gaza to.
I'm sure it went through their head.
As a result, I guess, the price being worth it. Again, it just seems like a society-wide suicide mission, or whoever, greenlighted it, must have known that they were sentencing so many of their people to death and destruction. So there was that on the conceptual level. Like, we never conceived that they would do something like that. The actual intelligence failure, that we were unable to detect plans. I mean, we're supposed to have eyes on them, ears on them. We're supposed to have, rooms and buildings full of people whose whole job is to follow what Hamas is doing and break into their phones and hack their computers and know what they're doing every single second. So the fact that we could fail on this level just seemed unbelievable. And then the operational failure of, even if we thought there was a tiny little chance that this could happen, that we would be so unready and unprepared to help these communities that were right at the border, that there just was nothing in place to go in there in less than 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 10 and 12 hours. It just seems like a betrayal of the basic Israeli social contract. And a lot of people have said this to me, as I've done my journalism work, that, we serve these years in the army, we pay these crazy taxes, we give to the country, and we feel let down that we can't afford to live here, and we feel let down by our leaders and the corruption and the trials and the BBN and this, but basic, we trust the country to keep us safe and alive. Like, that is the underlying fundamental contract. And we're also, educated. I say we, our kids, people who grow up in Israel, Holocaust, never again, we have a country so that this kind of thing will never again happen to the Jews. So I just think on all of those, levels like an onion, there's many layers to the feeling of betrayal. It just seems like on so many levels, Israelis are completely let down by anything that they believe this country is and was and meant to each other. And all that it seems left, and Noah, you described it in the opening, is people having each other and people, depending on and leaning and trusting each other. But that's not a substitute for believing that your country is going to protect you and take care of you.
Yeah, I think the betrayal is profound and like general and specific at the same time. We have an army. Where were they? But also specifically, the residents of Otef Aza were betrayed, and it wasn't as if they had not been saying this for a very long time, and also communities along all of our borders. So, if you're look, you have what we call the conceptia. The conceptia of the army was that our intelligence and our technology, our ability, our surveillance, to some extent, our sources that we cultivate from within the Palestinian world, all of those together make us very smart, and we have these great gadgets that can protect us. And even as we fear, Iran, we think about, God forbid, missiles. What we didn't think about was barbarians as much. We didn't think that this was going to be medieval in the sense of like the most ridiculous movie you've ever seen. So we didn't think it would be hordes. We didn't think it would be rape. We didn't think it would be brutalizing of people alive and dead, burning people alive. We didn't.
Babies.
Babies. It was inconceivable, and that changes for me. You ask what does that change? That degree of evil and the support that it received around the world, with the Palestinian protesters doing this crying thing, with their eyes, boo-hoo. That was the boo-hoo motion to Jews around the world. That brutality is not actually medieval. It's very, very current, and it very much, drives home how dehumanized we are with all of our, look, social media played a horrific role in this, because they understood that while they were doing these things that I call medieval, they were going to broadcast them on people's Facebook channels. So it was all very, very, very planned. Anyone that thinks, Avi Sakharov was usually so smart, said, they were surprised by their success. They didn't plan to get this far. Absolutely not. They came planning with this. They had maps of these towns and kibbutzim. They knew where everything was. It had been, planned. You ask what they wanted to achieve. I mean, this is already punditry, but they, I think, sold at least many of these terrorists, these Hamas young men raised in the horrific conditions of Gaza. They sold them a bill of goods that said that they were rescuing Jerusalem, Al-Aqsa, and that they literally were going to occupy the southern part of Israel. They actually thought they were going to be running. They were going to be occupiers in those areas. That was, I think, what they imagined. So this is really profound. The other thing, of course, and so important, is the life force of this country. If anyone underestimates Israelis, they are really stupid, because, cliche, Golda telling Biden, our secret weapon is we have nowhere else to go. It's really important. It's relevant. It's current. And Israelis are really good at emergencies. We know, unfortunately, sadly, we know what to do. And the last thing that those people were in those safe rooms was cowardly. They fought like lions. And we will never know so many hundreds of stories because entire families were killed. There was nobody left to tell that story. But the ones we know, they fought like lions.
Yeah, well, I I also felt everything that you said. I mean, shocked by the things that went wrong that would have seemed impossible to me, and I wouldn't have expected that I could be surprised by like by what you called the life force of Israel, because I'm often amazed by it. That's like the thing that makes life such a joy here, seeing it in all its different instances, just in day to day life. But still, it surprises me just how powerful it is, and what kind of like the genius that people have for caring about each other, for affinity. But for me, one of the things that in an Ashamnu Bagadnu sort of way that keeps striking me is what you also said, Miriam, about this area which is called Otef Aza, the Gaza envelope in English, but just the area outside of Gaza, because we all, I'm sure, know it pretty well. Everyone knows people who come from there, and we all, I have students who come from there, and for years and years and years, I mean, for decades, these people have been saying this: we're this is our home, and it's dangerous, and we will, and and it's not like I ever didn't think that they were 100% right and deserved all the support that could be given to them, but it did not. It was not like part of my moral universe at all. Like this thing not really the like the degree to which like they were living there, and I thought it was pretty safe, and I thought like. And I thought that the government was like pretty
risk.
looking over that, and it was a risk. But what the risk I thought it was a risk of a person getting killed here or there, which is a terrible tragedy. I never thought that wasn't like that was fine, but they were telling me all the way along that something like this could happen. They were saying that like in retrospect, it's clearly what some of those people were saying.
Who's they?
Like all the people who spoke, that the maskirim of the secretary generals of the kibbutzim when they talked on the radio, the people that I had conversations with, just like about day to day life. What's it like to live there? Oh, it's beautiful. We love it. But we're like a little bit scared for our children.
Every community is supposed to have a security group from within the community. That's old is Israeli. We had, I remember my first experience of it on Kibbutz Keturah, and many decades ago. And those resources have been dried up, and the guns have been locked away because who needs guns anymore when we've got this surveillance, and salaries that existed for a security, a Rosh Bitachon Shotef, the ongoing security person in there. Those have, gone away, and the news media has covered it over and over again the way we're covering climate change. Too bad.
In a couple of cases, exceptional cases, somebody on one of these kibbutzim got early wind of the fact that there was invasion, and some of them there were brave stories of people running around to tell anyone. They called it the Kitat Bitachon, the security
Kitat
group.
Konanut, yeah.
Kitat Konanut. They were able to get the guns out in a couple cases. There were also some young people living on the kibbutz who were recently discharged from the army and had a personal weapon with them. And there are a very few cases of the people getting to the entrance of the kibbutz on time, fighting some very brave battles against the infiltrators, against
And
the Hamas,
succeeding.
and succeeding and saving the people
Kibbutz.
on their kibbutz. But in a lot of cases,
Yeah.
it was just a matter of luck, of somebody discovering it early and being able to warn enough people early enough to get in place to do something about it.
And saving 100 lives. And the last thing that I'll talk about that I learned that you did not, neither of you learned this because you knew it well before, I think, but I who am always trying to like get a clearer grasp on what I think about the protests and the protesters. One of the things I feel like I learned from this is, first of all, practically everyone who was attacked and murdered and suffered these tragedies and taken hostage, they're like basically they're all the protesters. It's all like this part of the country in these places, except save for the city of Sderot, which is more mixed. All of these kibbutzim
Ashkelon also, yeah.
and Ashkelon, but these moshavim, they're all filled with people who are of the demographics and of the ideology to be part of the protest, like I am, only more so, I think, and they and they have been arguing. I mean, not these people particularly, but by the way, my Facebook feed and Twitter feed filled up with like peace activist after peace activist. So, Vivian Silver, she's one of the heads of Women Wage Peace. She's now hopefully living as a hostage in Gaza at the moment. And one
She's
after another of these
somebody
people
who goes to Erez to the check to pick up people who need to go to the hospital, Palestinians who need to go to the hospital, and takes them to the hospital in her car.
Exactly. And there were, and in my feed, there were dozens and dozens of people who I like vaguely knew or knew of through like being in the peace movement in some way, or being in the protests right now. And what the protesters, not just these people, but all the protesters have been saying, among other things, for these 9 months is, especially when they've been attacked as traitors and whatnot, that one of the things they've been saying is that we represent a certain kind of like way of life and way of looking at life that is profound and right at the heart of what the idea behind this country ever and always was, like beginning 100 years ago, the second Aliyah. It's a kind of secular Zionism that this sort of that is like deeply humanistic and has these universal values and is committed to peace, but is also like deeply committed to Israel. And we feel as though our culture is under attack in Israel more broadly. And I have been ambivalent about this, partly saying to myself, yes, well, and I see that somewhat, but also isn't this culture that you're now saying we need to stand up and fight for ourselves and remake the country again in our own image? Isn't that like the old hegemonic culture? I've been saying, all these crap things, and then seeing story after story after story, just seeing the photos of these people, getting a little bit more of a glimpse of what these farming, agricultural settlements, these kibbutzim and moshavim were like. I see more clearly just how beautiful that thing is and how much it is like a straight continuation of this old Zionism that is a good thing. I mean, that doesn't mean that it's not, that there's nothing to it being hegemonic and that Israel doesn't need to expand to include other voices and whatever. But they were right. They were right. I see that now. And they were attacked, and they responded, like you said, Miriam, as heroes. And then all around the country, people just like them. I mean, really, everyone has organized from all sides, but especially in some ways, like Achim Laneshek.
Part of it was that they had set up an infrastructure. First of all, that they are militarily minded. They have that muscle that sets up. That's organizational. Those are who's been running things,
and they're connected to all sorts of things and to each other and whatever.
Also to the army. I mean, the Achim Laneshek are fighters who switched their goal to fight for democracy. That doesn't mean that they hadn't set up a million WhatsApp groups and had all kinds of resources at their. So they were the ones that set up, what they call here a war room, a chamal. Right away to distribute all the things that were needed. And you have...
Right away, 24 hours before the last of the terrorists were driven from the kibbutzim, they were already driving into these kibbutzim and bringing stuff. It's an amazing thing.
Well, we brought stuff to the place in Renana. They said, we don't know where this stuff is going. We still haven't identified the target, but they were already organizing it and making sure that it was ready. So when they can decide where it needed to go, that it could go.
So just the thing that I learned is that this stuff that they were saying about do not be so quick to criticize, to dismiss this culture because there is something profound and important and deep about it. Like that is just I saw over and over and over
I should
again.
say it's so important what you said. And if everyone has the picture of a hero in their mind, so maybe they look a lot like those people. But this is a wide scale war. The entire country is activated. It's it's a call up, a general call up. So more than that, I think you're seeing everybody. You're
Yeah.
seeing, including everybody, is it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see where ultra Orthodox Haredim fit into this. I know lots of stories about them, bringing food and obviously praying and able to fill spots that people who are called up go. But I think that might get a little dicey soon. But Bedouin have died here. Druze soldiers have died here. Everybody across the political and ethnic map is
in
engaged.
in that horrible story of the rave, the Brazilian music thing, where 260 people were murdered and some of them were raped before they were murdered. One of the heroes of that story is this Druze bus driver who just would not pull out the bus even though it was being shot upon until he filled it with as many people as possible, and then kept stopping to pick up wounded people on the side as he was being shot at himself to hustle them onto a bus. So yes, there was this
The
feeling that
scale of this is beyond anybody. It will be years and years just to document what happened here and, the people, and to understand where everybody was. And, you have in your mind, again, you have these incidents that stick with your Munich massacre. Think about all of the energy we put into the Olympians who were slaughtered in Munich, and nothing. We can't even begin to contain this.
The hostage situations, think about how we focused on Ron Arad and focused on Gilad Shalit, one person, one soldier, and now we've got hundreds of civilians and soldiers being held hostage.
So that's a great
Right, near future.
transition to the last thing that we'll
Yeah.
talk about briefly, which is we have the army getting bigger and bigger, having called up almost 400,000 reserve soldiers, and we have 150 hostages hopefully still alive in Gaza. What do you hope, fear, think, imagine about the next day, week, month?
Well, we're already seeing the devastation in Gaza, and that will likely continue. There is no appetite for restraint, and that's very, very worrying. Maybe the presence of the U.S. will be a force that can hold us back. When you've got to show right now the feeling, we're going to hear a lot of rhetoric. We are already, which is in the category of what they say, Baal Habayit Hishtagea. We are completely without restraint now, and forgetting that we are a sovereign nation that is required to follow international law, has long-term terrible moral consequences and others as well. So that's going to be even the next few days. And obviously a ground war changes everything where people are going in. It means a very likely high casualty count for Israel. So we really have to brace for a time when what we've been through already will seem small compared to what we might go through
It's hard to imagine that.
yeah. So funerals in the near future, the funerals, and they are one of the ephemera of this moment is the Chevra Kadisha, those responsible for handling burial, making a call. Can anyone come and dig graves? Are there any chazanim that could come and accompany the dead and the families? They didn't have enough people to dig.
We haven't been able to get people to have funerals yet because they haven't been able to get the bodies out of the houses.
Where it's Wednesday when we're recording, there are bodies. There will still be for some time in the field. Politics will blow up very soon.
Very soon, or after the ground war in Gaza is over?
It's already arrived. It's already arrived because the media, which we can talk about later in the Patreon. If you were giving, you would be able to listen to Patreon if you donated. We can talk about that, but the mamlachtiyut of the media, the ability to be sort of diplomatic and the voice of reason is you can feel it eroding, and they are interested, and rightly so, in looking at the political failure, including the inability as of this recording to create an emergency or unity government. So that's already happening.
Yeah, as we record, they announced that there's going to be a
With
national unity
Gantz
government.
joining the government.
Right. So
believe
maybe no
But
one
not
will
Lapid, right?
not Lapid. They want the generals in the room.
The
maybe,
former generals.
Maybe we won't remember that it took 4 or 5 days to do this when it should have taken 2. It becomes, when as other things overtake, it becomes less
Other
relevant.
things of this enormity.
Yeah. But
Events are happening so fast that happened as we recorded, and there was a siren as we recorded that we weren't aware of.
I saw it. So I think there's that, and I think all of us are. There's going to be a tremendous need for medical professionals, where everyone's on emergency footing now, but the medical
Susan,
requirements.
who went to the airport to do a vigil so she could get on a seat to come home because she didn't want to not be in the country when her son was going off to the army. Once she landed, she got a message saying you are not allowed to leave.
Yeah,
because she's a
no
doctor.
medical professionals to leave. We already started out with a deficit of medical teams, and so I think that we will be seeing the arrival of volunteers or professionals from abroad. I don't know how licensing issues work, but that's going to be big. Trauma is already
psychological trauma.
Yes, so psychological trauma is already in full operation. It's amazing how many resources, at least they tell you that they have. I don't really know how much time they can spend, but thousands, hundreds of millions of people will require some form of trauma treatment now and for the foreseeable future.
Wow. These are the worst questions. What will happen? I'm always good at analyzing what has happened.
But also, what are you worried about happening, or what do you hope could happen?
Everything. I'm worried about a two-front war. I'm worried about the North heating up. I'm worried about Hezbollah.
Which there are signs of, right?
I'm worried about Hezbollah being activated. They have missile capabilities that dwarf anything that Hamas is capable of. I'm worried about true destruction coming from the North. I really hope whatever is able to rein back Hezbollah. I don't know, whether it's Nasrallah himself or the Iranians. That's what
I think moving an aircraft carrier into this region will help. That was the purpose.
Yeah, a lot of Israelis were really, really encouraged by the hard line that President Biden took. First of all, he did not call for Israel to have any restraint. They felt like he had their back in that way, and that he tried to issue this warning. He said, don't. If you want to escalate this conflict, don't do it. That's
also, it was good to have a national leader show compassion and authority. And because we didn't have one here.
Yeah, refreshing, huh?
I think it's one of his greatest speeches. I mean, okay, I'm biased. I'm interested in what he says about Israel, but it was a very emotional.
It was beautiful.
It was emotional to listen to.
Yeah, it was human, and that's what we're not having come out of our leaders right now, is any form of human leadership. And I think, that's just the central psychological dilemma of this. And again, I've been asked about this from a lot of foreign media outlets. Do Israelis have faith in their leadership going into this war? I say no, but we don't have any choice. I don't think people have great faith in the people leading this government, but they also don't think that now is the time to try to behead our own leadership, to try to, do any kind of switch in this kind of movement military situation. And that's sort of the main crux of the crisis that we're in, as I see it, is we have to make do with the leadership we have in the situation that we're in. And yet, in our guts, do we really think that Benjamin Netanyahu has our best interest at heart? Do you guys?
I do think he has our best interest at heart, but I do not think that he is at the moment capable of being a leader with good judgment.
Why didn't he put together a national unity government within 10 minutes of this thing breaking out? Why are we sitting here 4.5 days later and it's only announced now, and then it's going to have to go through all this procedures and votes, et cetera? If he really cared about that versus his own political interests of keeping partners in the coalition who will keep his political life alive, if he really cared about the country and not about himself, wouldn't we be in a different position today? Wouldn't he have made much quicker decisions? I just feel very cynically like he doesn't care about us, that he does care about himself, and we have to live with it and we have to deal with it as best we can. And I say, good for you, Benny Gantz, for sucking it up and sitting in a government with this guy who you don't trust as far as you can throw him in order to try to protect the country as best you can.
Okay, now listen to this.
בגלל העצב בשעת פרידה תדע על מה שנתת אני מודה בגלל עינייך צלצול של שמך מפני שכבר דבק בי דבר ממך ניסיתי להאחז בכנפך ולא שיניתי ולא שונה מעופך לא לי שלווה נועדת מעולמך אהוב
That song is Duet Preda by Shaili Atari and Roy Neufeld. Shaili Atari is the niece of the great singer Gali Atari, who wrote that song. You can find her in all the places, and we'll feature her on the show sometime soon. And now it is time for our About a Country segment, and this is the part of the show in which each of us describes something that might have surprised or amused or delighted or enchanted or ensorcelled or maybe even fluked us as we watched the country change in front of our eyes over the past few days. So, Miriam, what is your About a Country?
As I'm sure listeners have guessed in the past, generally write out my What a Country. And so I'm going to be winging it a little bit. We've been really, really busy here. So this is going to sound a little bit, smarmy, smart alecky, but one of the grace, the aspects that are grace, there are many actually, but one of them is the absence of politicians. It's sort of Ben Gvir in particular, I realize is like a buzz in my ear at all times. I'm wondering, when's he going to say the next thing? And it's actually been great, even though the government, the top leaders were really criticized for not coming out, and I guess they should have. But that kind of quiet and the ability to just have a normal public discourse about what was happening and focus on what was important has been really, really helpful to me. That's going to end very soon. It's already ending. And so in my work, what I was looking for was not, sort of political analyses, right? So I'm trying to edit a platform where we are hearing voices. And as I mentioned already, Adele Reimers, what turned into a log of her experiences through the day. But what I'm paying attention to at work are people who are able to write something that takes me on a journey, on an emotional journey. And so one of them I just wanted to point out is by Rabbi Harris Bohr, a British barrister and author, rabbi, research fellow at the London School of Jewish Studies, and he wrote a kinah, a lamentation or a lament. And I have to tell you, it is really strange and odd for me to push out, sort of feature this kind of writing that I always think is niche and it's for our, more for our religious readers. Maybe not so many people will understand what this is. And it is really profound that he took the language that we have in our long history of lamentation, and created something that expresses what we're feeling and talks about the horror of what happened and is self-blaming in the way that Jewish lamentation is classically, and talks to God in a way that I find really, really moving. It's called A Lament for These Times, Oy Mehayalano, which is it's built on a lament that was composed by Baruch ben Shmuel of Mainz, the 12th century Paitan. Another piece that went up today, I found on Facebook and was very moved, called Dual Loyalty, describing what it is like to feel compassion for and horror over what happened to Israelis, and also to feel at the same time compassion and horror over what is happening to Palestinian civilians in Gaza. And the writer's name is Sahar Vardi. The piece is called Dual Loyalty, and I think it's really, really beautiful. She describes being in the market in Machane Yehuda and hearing a woman talk about how her Arab vegetable seller couldn't come because Arabs are not opening up their stalls, are not able to open their stalls because they're at risk of being beaten up. She talks about that as well, and also seeing families go into the homes of people who are either clearly sitting, have had someone killed or held, and just being able to hold those two things. And I think that's worth a read. And there's a lot more, and it's the people who are writing from the gut and from the heart right now that are so important and so helpful to help us process this. So I really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. I'll look at those. Allison, what is your what a country?
Well, it's hard to think about anything these days except for the victims of this terrible, terrible, murderous war. That's the only word I can use. What do I say? Attack, infiltration, surprise, ambush that happened on Saturday. And everybody's got their different circles of friends that they've known from different parts and different sections of their lives. And so this thing, feeling the connection of people of loss, has all of these different layers, different circles. The contacts that I have to different degrees of loss. So just to start from, the further degrees of loss, I'm in this community in Renana. The English speaking community of Renana is a very tight, interconnected group. And so far, there have been 2 soldiers killed who are the sons of and son-in-law of people in this community that I know. And yesterday, I went to the military cemetery, literally 2 blocks from my house. I just had to walk less than 2 minutes and to see pretty much everyone I knew from the English-speaking community of Renana gathered to say goodbye to Aryeh Ziering, who is the son of people. And, as I heard, English being spoken among the entire group, people I knew, people I didn't know. This was somebody's friend of the mother from college in the United States. The mom is from Westchester, Debbie, and the father, Mark, is from Bangor, Maine. So all of these, groups of people who made Aliyah from these places who knew them from back there. And then people who are from the community in Camp Moshava, where all of the kids went to school. And then people who are from the synagogue communities, just these overlapping social groups and people who know each other from, going back 10, 20, 30, 40 years on both sides in Israel and in the U.S. And they belong to this congregation in Renana Ohel Ari, which is named after Ari Weiss, who's also the son of English-speaking Israelis who was killed in the I believe in 2002 from an ambush of Hamas terrorists in the West Bank. And then there was Amir Skouri, who was the son-in-law of other English-speaking Renana residents, and he was killed in the Second Lebanon War. And he is the son-in-law of the chairman of the board of Bayit Shel Benji, Benji's house, which is for lone combat soldiers in Renana, which is named after a fallen soldier who immigrated from Great Britain. So just this whole big circle of immigrants from English-speaking countries, everyone who knows each other and leans on each other has suffered this additional loss in this round. So there was that group of people. And then Hannah Katzman, who I know because she's a very prominent Orthodox religious feminist. Her son was killed on kibbutz Cholit, at first believed kidnapped, and then it turned out that he was killed. And he was a PhD in 2021 from the University of Washington, specializing in religious Zionism, and worked on kibbutz Cholit on their mechina, on their pre-army program, teaching political philosophy to young Israelis about to join the army. And he just looked like an amazing free spirit. And Hannah is now posting every single day people who are writing in who knew him in Washington, who knew him when he was traveling in India, and just revealing sort of what an open-hearted soul he was. And then at the most personal level, the woman who I wrote about, that we were joking about our kids in the Bruno Mars concert, was killed at Kibbutz Cholit. And her name was Debbie Shachar. She Hebraicized her name, so some people knew her as Debbie, some people knew her as Shachar. Cho and Matthias, her father was a former professor at Brandeis.
I heard her son on the radio.
Yeah.
He's in the hospital.
And her husband Shlomi. So they're part of a social circle that I've gotten to know pretty much over the past 6 months, and I've met them several times at various events, and we bonded because she's American and he's Israeli, and they met 26 years ago as students at the Rimon Music School in Ramat HaSharon, and where my daughter Nomi studies now. And Debbie is a singer-songwriter, and Shlomi was, I can't talk about her in past tense yet. Shlomi was a pianist and a songwriter, and we laughed at the comparisons. Nomi, my daughter, is a singer-songwriter, and her boyfriend Amir, who she met at Rimon, is a pianist. So we just laughed at the exact parallels from years past. So I got to know them, not deeply or very well, but when you have that sense of people that they're not your good friends now, but they will be.
They're your tribe.
Yeah, they're your tribe, and you are going to get to know them, and I'll see them at more parties. I'll get to know them better. Just that, that underlying assumption that you had. And then I heard, again, I was texting her. I texted her that stupid Bruno Mars meme about catching a grenade for you. That morning at 7-something, right? And she said that the people were pounding at the door. Then when I found out what happened, I was like, okay, they pounded at the door. But then she texted, so they obviously moved on to another place. I had no idea that I would hear the story that I heard through Daniel Estrin, the NPR reporter, that they had gotten through the door, and that Debbie died lying on top of her son, protecting him. And he ended up in the hospital with a stomach wound after having lain there waiting for help for hours and hours. But thank God, knock on wood, he seems like he's okay. And I feel like I've gotten to know her from conversations with her, but also from reading her social media. Her 50th birthday was on September 14th, and she posted a lot of posts about her 98-year-old grandmother who was lived in Haifa and clearing out of her apartment. And people were saying, may you have many more years with your grandmother, hoping the grandmother would live a long time, having no idea it would be Debbie who would lose her life so soon. So I just want to, in the What a Country spirit, I want to read the post that her sister, Bar Yuval Shani, wrote on her 50th birthday. She wrote, 50 years today, according to the Hebrew calendar, it's very, very early in the morning. I bolt out of bed the moment I hear the front door creak open. I run straight into Dad. Is it a girl? After 2 brothers, adorable as they are, a sister is all I want in the world. Dad smiles an enigmatic smile and doesn't say a word. He takes his time putting down his coat and parcels and walks past me into the garage. Is it a boy? I ask, falling fast on his heels. Not a word. Every second feels like an hour. A girl? Dad lifts me up and sets me down on his lap. A boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl. I try hard to read his expression, but he's trying almost as hard to keep a poker face. It's a boy, I finally said, eyes downcast. I'm so disappointed. I find myself deflating. It's a girl, he finally says, a hug grin blooming on his face. I'll never forget that moment. I have a sister. Deborah Shachar, I'd need another 120 Facebook posts just to scratch the surface of all we've shared, the secrets, deepest longings, doubts, dreams, births, painful times, music, fun. And much of it I could not and would not share publicly. I'd need more to write all my wishes from you, and then more to express how much I love you and how grateful I am still to share life together. That was Debbie's sister on her 50th birthday, September 14th, writing Bar Yuval Shani. All of our love and support and hugs are with you, as we are to Shlomi and Debbie's beautiful children, including his son, who we're grateful is still alive. And I would just like to close this out with some of her music, because Debbie and Shlomi were all about the music that they made together since the time that they were students at Rimon. And so I'd like to close this out with a little bit of a song sung by Debbie.
ובעצם אנחנו לא לבד, יש רוחות ושדים בבית זה, הם מרחפים אליי ושולחים מסרים, הם רוצים שאמכור את נשמתי, ואתה חזק יותר, מוצק וחי, עם חיוך אתה כאן אליי, ובנף יד מעיף את כל מה שכל כך קשה לי לשכוח.
On Sunday afternoon, there was a post on Facebook by my friend Meital Peleg, who just started a postdoc in environmental justice at Yale just after having twins. And she wrote, quote, "I can't stop crying, breastfeeding and crying. If there is something I can do from this distance, please write. Donations, hosting families on the East Coast, publicizing information, names of people that you want me to pray for, anything that will make me feel less powerless," end quote. And there are lots of comments, like one from Racheli Shurati, who wrote, "Pray for Yahav Wiener, son of Michal. May he be found healthy and whole." As it happened, Meital's prayers would be too late, as Yahav Wiener, who's married to Shaili Atari, whose song we just listened to, was killed as he fought off people coming into his house through the window, while Shaili and their baby Shaya escaped through the front door, Shaili barefoot, jumping into bushes outside the house with the baby and waiting until her neighbors risked the lives of their own 3 kids by opening their doors so that she and Shaya could slip into the house and into their fortified room. Yahav Wiener's body was dragged from his house by his murderers, and it was found only yesterday. And there were other people for Meital to pray for in the comments, though mostly in the comments people tried to comfort Meital herself on account of everyone knows how much harder it is not to be here than it is to be here when stuff like this is going on. What Meital expressed, though, is how strong the wish, the urge, the drive, the need to do something, anything to help is, as I've already said in lots of different ways over the course of this show. And the wish comes from seeing so much suffering, more tragic news than you ought to hear in a lifetime, all just in a couple of days, and really wanting to bring whatever little relief one can bring to the people who are suffering. And also, like Meital said, wanting to do something, anything, just to remember that we are not just Twitter scrolling things. And this being Israel, a place blessed always with great measures of creative energy, this wish, urge, drive, need has churned up all sorts of surprising things. A woman I know put together an app to match up people who need someone to look after their kids with people who can and want to look after kids for free, of course. Someone else I know made a ride-sharing app. It's like Uber, but without the money. If you're a soldier and you need to join your unit, or a cousin who needs to go south for a shiva, you enter where you need to go to, from where and when, and you'll have a ride. Restaurants in Tel Aviv are taking orders and delivering to refugee families or to soldiers. The chef at Meshek Barzilai took to delivering meals himself to vegan soldiers in the area whose units haven't organized vegan food yet. Our campaign headquarters in our campaign for city council, the elections will probably be postponed. We don't know yet. But our campaign headquarters is being repurposed today as a staging area for stuff to deliver to relocated victims and soldiers and whoever. And all of which is beautiful, obviously, and a big comfort now. But there's something more that I didn't see clearly, really, until last night when Allison WhatsApped, quote, "I'm at the Carlton. I just went to a press conference, and here in the lobby is a sweet, sweet family of 6 afraid to go back to their house in Ashkelon. I think someone offered them funding to stay at the hotel and then backed away from it or something. And they're just sitting here in the lobby, freaking out, not knowing what to do." And I knew that my friend, Rabbi, role model, Rav Joe Wolfson, who, among the lots of things he does, has built with his wife, Corrine, a community here in Tel Aviv. It's called JLIC-TLV, which community I knew was deep into helping where help is needed. So I called him and I said, Allison said there's a sweet family of 6 afraid to go back to their home in Ashkelon. And someone said they'd put them up the Carlton, but it fell through. And now they're in the lobby. And Joe said, do you know if they prefer a kosher home? And I said, no, I could check. And he said, give me 5 minutes and I'll have a place for them. And then he said, I'll put you in the WhatsApp group so you can follow along and see how this works. And I got a notice that I'd been added to the WhatsApp group, Rav, Joe, and Corrine, JLICTLV. And I saw that Rav Wolfson posted at 6:42 p.m., quote, okay, family of 6 from Ashkelon stranded at the Carlton in Tel Aviv, had been promised accommodation there but didn't materialize. Who can take them in? First to reply wins the mitzvah, end quote. At 6:42, 1 minute later, 2 big apartments in Tel Aviv had already been offered. And at 6:43, someone had offered to raise money for Airbnbs, and someone else had found someone who could register the family for an Airbnb for free. And at 6:44, several more offers came in. And at 6:46, Rav Joe Wolfson wrote, quote, stop. You guys are crazy. 10 plus offers. We have a winner. Thank you. Doubtless more to come. Beautiful. To me, he wrote that there is a big kosher apartment just a few blocks from the Carlton. Someone would pick them up and walk them to their new temporary home and give them the key. And another family had offered to buy them dinner first at the Carlton. They would phone in their credit card number. And I passed all this on to Relly, who's the mother in the family whose phone number Allison had given me. And she was delighted and she was grateful, as you'd guess, and the arrangements were made. But then after a few minutes, she wrote to say that friends in Tel Aviv had finally gotten back to her and they could stay with them. But thank you very much, she wrote to me. And when I told Rav Joe Wolfson, he said, okay, but please beg them to let us buy them dinner still at the Carlton, which, by the way, runs a chef restaurant in the hotel. Linda Gradstein has reviewed it. It's a fancy and expensive operation. And Relly WhatsApp back, Hashem yishmor etchem, may God watch over you. And then she wrote back saying, the kids just aren't hungry, they're tired. And by now, another word from me would just have been badgering the poor woman who escaped the barrage of rockets in Ashkelon for a smaller barrage of rockets here. So I let it go. And Rav Joe Wolfson said, there'll be other opportunities to help And since then, the Rav Joe and Corrine JLICTLV group has been pinging and pinging ever since maybe every 30 seconds or so. Someone got 65,000 bottles of shampoo and such donated from England if shipping could be covered, and someone else figured out how to cover the shipping. All of this in minutes or seconds, people giving rides, 150 towels delivered from a place that's got them to a place that needs them. And like I said, every, 30 seconds, 20 seconds, there's a ping from someone doing something for someone. And I wrote to Rav Joe that I felt like a curtain had been thrown back and that I saw a different layer of reality with clarity that I'd only seen in the shadows before. It's not as though I am not aware all the time of being surrounded at every moment by bounteous human kindness and generosity, even, before this war, before all this happened. But the different layer of reality, it is one, by the way, where property is not property. What's mine is meant for someone else, and where money is not money. Airbnbs are free and Ubers are free in that level of reality. It is a mitzvah economy. It is a compassion economy. It is an economy that spins human connections into material aid. I know a person who knows a person who knows a person who has a thing that a person, the second person knows, will deliver to a person none of us knows that will maybe help them a little to mend something, to fix something that needs fixing in their lives at this moment. And what I think about moments like this is that they let you see things that are true that you usually don't see, the buried pipes and wires of our moral infrastructure that are always there quietly doing their job, but at times like this, and maybe just for a fleeting flash, they are exposed. We can see them, and what a powerful blessing it is to see these things at the moment of our greatest tragedy. And that brings us to the end of our show. I got no heart for end of the show gags, but I do want to thank everyone for the support and the wishes and the love and the concern and for being so kind all the time and such a comfort all the time, but especially at a time like this. I and we hope that you and yours are safe and unharmed and stay that way, whatever the next days and weeks bring.
Amen.